Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. We're jumping right in today because we are looking at a literal geopolitical earthquake. It's a massive, growing strategic rift between two historically ironclad allies, the United States and Israel. We're talking about their completely different approaches to the escalating situation with Iran. You know, it's pretty rare to see Washington and Jerusalem not totally in lockstep on Middle Eastern security, which is exactly why we need to dig into this. This isn't just a minor political disagreement. It's a huge clash in fundamental strategy that could honestly change the entire trajectory of global security. So we're going to use the latest reports to break down exactly where they differ and what this unprecedented divide actually means for the rest of us.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap. First up, a tense phone call. Then, the American diplomatic pivot. Third, Israel's push for action. Fourth, we'll be comparing the two strategies. And finally, the ticking clock. Section 1. A tense phone call. All right, the core of the issue here is that these two super close allies are fundamentally split over Iran. And the dispute? Well, it's pretty straightforward, but the stakes are incredibly high. The big question on the table right now is, should there be renewed military strikes against Iran, or should the focus shift entirely to hammering out a negotiated settlement? Two completely different paths, right? A military strike obviously risks igniting a much wider regional war, while going the negotiation route requires a ton of trust in a relationship that has historically had zero trust. For two countries that almost always present a united front, this is a massive fork in the road regarding how to actually secure the Middle East. Just to give you an idea of how tense things are getting, Axios recently reported on a phone call between Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and President Donald Trump, citing insider sources. And man, the way they described Netanyahu's reaction, they literally said, quote, his hair was on fire. It's a crazy vivid detail, but it perfectly captures the extreme emotional and political tension of that call. It really shows you just how incredibly frustrated the Israeli leadership was when they found out the U.S. was formally backing away from immediate military action. Which brings us to Section 2, the American diplomatic pivot. So President Trump recently announced he's actually postponing that proposed military strike on Iran. He wants to give diplomacy a chance first. And the tool they're using for this? It's called a letter of intent. The U.S. let Netanyahu know that mediators are actively putting this document together for the U.S. and Iran to sign. Think of it as a really crucial stepping stone. It's a preliminary agreement designed specifically to hit the pause button and de-escalate the immediate threat of a war. Basically, by committing to this letter, the U.S. is trying to freeze the conflict right where it is, just to create some breathing room so everyone can talk before any missiles actually fly. But the U.S. definitely isn't flying solo on this one. A bunch of other nations have jumped in to mediate. You've got Qatar, the UAE, and other Arab nations actively asking the U.S. to cool things down, which absolutely played a role in halting the military action. And you have to remember, these countries are geographically right on the front lines. They know a kinetic war means they're instantly caught in the crossfire. Alongside them, Pakistan is also playing a really critical role here, using their diplomatic channels to try and find some common ground between Washington and Tehran. And the timeline for this? 30 days. Now, 30 days is basically a blink of an eye in the world of complex geopolitics, but the U.S. is really hoping it's just enough time to cool the region down. Under this proposed letter of intent, there would be a strict 30-day window for intensive talks. And the main focus? Tackling Iran's nuclear program and making sure the incredibly vital Strait of Hormuz stays open. When you factor in the literal decades of bad blood here, trying to start out nuclear containment and global shipping lanes in a single month, yeah, that is a monumental undertaking. All right, let's move to Section 3, Israel's push for action. So while the U.S. is pushing for talks, a recent CNN report highlighted that a large faction within the Israeli government thinks this whole diplomatic pivot is exactly what Tehran wants. From the Israeli perspective, Iran is just intentionally stalling. They strongly suspect Iran is using these negotiations simply to buy precious time, to fortify their military positions, move their key assets deeper underground, and build up their leverage while the threat of an American strike is officially off the table. To the Israeli defense establishment, this pause isn't a step toward peace at all. It's basically just handing a tactical advantage right over to their adversary. Because they are so deeply skeptical, Prime Minister Netanyahu's preferred game plan looks vastly different from signing a letter of intent. Israel's immediate military objectives are to resume strikes to seriously degrade Iran's military capacity and to specifically target key infrastructure. They firmly believe that applying immediate crippling kinetic pressure is really the only reliable way to neutralize the threat and set back Iran's nuclear ambitions. To put it simply, they trust hardware destruction way more than a diplomatic promise. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is seeing these two distinct philosophies laid out side by side. Section 4, comparing the two strategies.
Here is the absolute philosophical split at the core of this whole explainer. On one side, you have Trump's current approach, negotiation and de-escalation, putting faith in international mediators to find a way out. And then, on the exact opposite side, you have Netanyahu's approach, military action and relentless pressure, completely driven by a deep, historical distrust of anything Iran says diplomatically. It is the classic debate, right? Diplomatic leverage versus overwhelming military force.
Let's break down this comparison table because it really highlights the divide we're talking about today. When you look at their preferred approaches, the contrast is stark. The United States wants to sign that letter of intent for a 30-day pause. Israel, on the other hand, is firmly advocating for immediate military airstrikes. And this huge difference in tactics comes directly from what they're most worried about. The U.S.'s primary concern right now is regional de-escalation. They want to pull the Middle East back from the edge of a massive war. Israel's primary concern is falling victim to Iranian stalling tactics. They believe every single day of negotiation just makes Iran stronger. And all of this leads to two completely different angles. The U.S. wants a negotiated treaty covering the nuclear issue and the Strait of Hormuz to keep the global economy stable. Israel's stated end goal right now is crippling Iranian infrastructure to physically and permanently remove the threat. It really is a massive choice between the diplomat's pen and the commander's sword.
Which leads us to our final part. Section 5, the ticking clock. 14 points. That is the huge hurdle sitting right in the middle of these talks. Iran has made it crystal clear that they are only going to proceed with negotiations if it's based on their own 14-point proposal. In fact, the Iranian Foreign Ministry came out and said that while talks are happening, reaching an actual agreement is not going to be easy. They are standing incredibly firm on a really complex web of demands. So, that path to a quick diplomatic win within that tiny 30-day window, it is extremely narrow, if it even exists at all.
And President Trump is well aware of this. He recently issued a pretty stark ultimatum, saying, quote, "Everything is now standing on the borderline. If the right answer is not received, the situation can change very fast." That statement is crucial. It shows that while the U.S. president is strongly preferring diplomacy right now, American patience has a very strict, immovable limit. If those 30 days run out and there's no tangible progress, the U.S. is totally signaling that they are prepared to walk away from the table and revert right back to the military path alongside Israel.
So, we're going to wrap up our explainer today with one critical, looming question. If talks fail, is war inevitable? We've seen how the U.S. is desperately pushing for a treaty, while Israel is already gearing up for decisive military action. With mediators scrambling against a rapidly ticking 30-day clock and Iran refusing to budge on its 14 points, the stakes literally could not be higher. What happens at the end of these 30 days isn't just going to shape the Middle East, it is going to deeply impact global security, international alliances, and energy markets all over the world. Thank you so much for joining me today, and definitely keep a close eye on the news as this ticking clock counts down to 0.